So if you're betting or Betfair trading on pretty much any sport, one of the pieces of advice that I would give you on a betting exchange is read the rules. Why? Because if you don't, you could fall into a number of traps. But it's also important to understand what governs the settlement of a market within an individual sport as well. And if you do that, then you'll probably be able to spot a few opportunities where the market makes a mistake. And on this particular video, we're going to explore something that happened recently that resulted in a BetAngel user making £10,000 in just one horse race in just a few minutes. And this was mainly down to a misinterpretation of the rules. So let's have a look at exactly what he did in this video. Please like and comment on this video. That will allow me to produce better quality videos and more of them. And if you're interested in learning from somebody that's been doing this for over 20 years, then subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon if you want notification of new videos as they're released. So I have done some videos on these sort of situations that have occurred before, but I'm going to focus specifically on one unique scenario that occurred fairly recently. But you do find on a betting exchange that, the market rules are there to govern and be fair to both sides of the book. So they need to be fair to backers and layers. It's not like a traditional bookmaking setup where if you do something crazy, the bookmaker can adjust it or make a commercial decision on whether the interpretation of the rules or the market were correct. On a betting exchange, they are hard and fast because they need to balance out both sides. If you backed something and it favors a layer, you'll feel upset. But obviously, if you're a layer and they favor the backer, then you'll feel upset. So ultimately, there's a set of rules in place that determine and govern exactly how a market will be settled and exactly what the market is. But there have been instances where people have completely misinterpreted it. The most recent, well, there have been loads all the time, but two of the sort of high profile ones that I can point you at, which I've done videos on that you can read up and learn about, are the next US president market, where people were betting on something that simply couldn't happen according to the rules. And they did it twice as well, which was remarkable. But also I did a video called, I think it was The Worst Football Trade Ever, whatever. I will list both of the videos alongside this video so that you can view them and interpret exactly what happened and why. But there was a great scenario. I say great, it wasn't too great for people on the wrong side of it, but it's a great example, I think is what I'm trying to say, where people were betting on a football match on something that was definitely going to lose money, and they just made it 10 times worse for themselves. So one of the messages that I've got for you is always read the rules. Understand completely the market that you're active in and what the rules mean for the way the market's going to be settled or how things could change. Now, most of the time, that's pretty clear. And if you get a bit of experience in a market, you'll begin to understand exactly what that scenario is and how it could influence the outcome of things. And for example, on horse racing, it's fairly standard if you're trading. But there are situations where if you perform one strategy or another, that could radically affect the way that the market is settled, depending upon stuff that goes on. And indeed, on racing, there are at least two markets over the course of the year, very high profile markets, that are initially created as false markets. I will probably do a video as we approach those markets so that you're aware of that and you don't fall into that trap. But I've fallen into that trap when I first started out. So everybody does it. So don't feel too aggrieved if you fall into the same trap every now and again. But generally for the day-to-day stuff, you're pretty clear and things are pretty obvious, neat and tidy. But there are situations where unusual things can happen. But my advice to you is always read the rules of the market, understand it, go for things gradually. And if you see an opportunity that's too good to be true, then you can always pop onto the forum and ask for advice, and somebody will correct you fairly quickly if they think you're making a mistake. And there's no harm in asking, because there is no such thing as a stupid question. I've fallen into traps in the long and distant past, and I'm sure anybody that's new to this game may also fall into another traps. But by and large, you can basically be rest assured that most markets are fairly clear and plain. It's just the odd exception that occurs that sometimes catches people out. If you want to know what the rules are on each underlying market, then you can do that. Go to the Betfair website, click on the eye icon, and that will bring up a set of rules. It used to be an eye icon. I'm pretty sure that it still is, but there may be a button that determines the rules some other way or shows it some other way. But I will bring up a screenshot and highlight what you need to click on if you want to check what you're actually betting on. Now, the interesting thing is that sometimes the actual rules of the sport can determine something really unusual. And this is what we have specifically on this video, because there was a situation that occurred fairly recently at Fontwell where something unusual happened. And if you were smart, then you would actually be able to take advantage of that. And indeed, one BetAngel user did, and he made an awful lot of money very, very quickly, simply because he knew exactly what the rules of the underlying sport meant for what he could see on the screen. And in fact, it was actually highlighted somewhat as the market unfolded as well. But in order to understand what he did and how the rules influenced the settlement of the market and created this opportunity, let's actually examine what happened in that race. So in order to understand where the opportunity was, we need to have a look at the race. And in this particular race, as the horses were coming around to meet one of the hurdles, one of the horses clipped the top of the hurdle and had to be pulled up.
Pulling up there is Bluebell Sally. Bluebell Sally has been immediately pulled up after crossing over flight number 4. Bluebell Sally dismounted.
So the jockey decided to pull up the horse and dismount it on the course. And they decided to attend to the horse immediately at that particular section of the course. Now, of course, that created an obstacle, and the horses were going to be coming back round to meet that hurdle again on the next loop of the course. So they took measures to try and alert the jockeys to exactly what was going on. Now, the interesting thing is that caused a moment of confusion.
They are going to take this next flight of hurdles, but then they're going to be immediately angled towards the inner of the track. Indeed, the jockeys didn't know what they were going to do there. Now, I believe they had to take that flight.
So what we're looking at here is a jumps race. And as the name suggests, they have to clear all obstacles to be able to win the race legitimately. And obviously what happened on this particular occasion was that all but one of the horses actually cleared the obstacle. And there was obviously a certain amount of confusion, but the interesting thing was that the jockey on the horse that actually jumped the hurdle basically came out and said, well, I could see there was a bit of confusion, so I thought I'd better jump the hurdle anyway. And that's exactly what he did. Now, the interesting thing was that the commentator picked up on this almost immediately and indicated that basically it looked like, and he was almost certain, that all of the horses that missed it weren't going to actually qualify to win the race. And in fact, the only horse that would technically win the race was the one that actually jumped that hurdle. So all of the horses carried on around the course as though nothing had happened. The race was run in the same manner in which you would typically expect. But the commentator had a few things to say as the horses crossed the line.
So, of the horses who missed the third from home, Just Henny has won. Tight second, Have a Cuppa and Kalea, followed in fourth home by Kentford Mallard. Then came Queen Among Kings, followed next by Dharma Rain. And Dharma Rain, I believe, is the only horse who may have completed the entire...
So, of course, the funny situation that we had here was that the horse that crossed the line first wasn't actually the winner, because the only winner of the race would actually be the horse that had finished and crossed all those obstacles. And the interesting thing about this race was, as the winner crossed the line and the market was suspended, you could still back the actual winner of the race, the horse that wasn't disqualified, at a fairly good price. But you could also back the horse that finished first as well. There was complete confusion in the market, and one really astute BetAngel user could understand what had happened and had picked the right horse. He knew the rules of the market, he understood the rules of the underlying sport itself, and took full advantage of this opportunity. So somewhat ironically, I wasn't able to profit from this. As you know, I tend to do pre-off racing predominantly. I do some in-play stuff, and a lot of that is automated because my main focus is on looking at the next opportunity that's coming around the corner. However, in the back, I always have the racing on in the background so that I could tell that something unusual was happening, and BetAngel customer got in contact with me to sort of say, did you see what happened at Fontwell? And I sort of like, well, I figured out that something unusual had happened. And he sent me his P&L, which is what you can now see on the screen in front of you. And the unusual thing about this screenshot is obviously he had to be decisive and to take action. So as the horses were coming towards the finish line, something really unusual was happening, and that was that the price on the horse that was in the lead that crossed the line first was shortening. But of course, the horse that was way back in the back of the field was the only horse that had actually managed to successfully clear all the hurdles. So therefore, all of the other horses would be disqualified. And even as that crossed the line, it was still available to back at fairly decent amounts. Now, there are several reasons for this. One of them is cross-matching and various other things. But obviously, there were lots of people on course that either misinterpreted, didn't see what they'd done, or didn't understand the rules. But nonetheless, you could basically still back the horse that was the official winner, even though it was much further down the field, and there was still money available at fairly decent odds when the imagined winner crossed the line. So what this BetEngine customer did was basically just took as much money as he could on that horse that was eventually declared the winner after all of the others were disqualified. So it did get a little bit of press coverage, but ultimately it was one of those sort of strange events that occurred that had all of the right components to it. There was something unusual that happened. There was a little bit of confusion, and therefore that just tipped the jockeys' minds in the wrong direction. And ultimately, jockeys can get banned for making these sort of mistakes. And that's how the racing authorities try and clamp down on these sort of errors. But ultimately, they still happen simply because of a confluence of coincidences that leads people into these errors. You can't completely stamp it out because sometimes fate just dictates that there's a little bit of confusion sets in, strange set of situations occurs. And that's the way that things turn out. But the moral of the story is if you're aware of all of those rules and you're sharp enough, then there's no reason why you couldn't take advantage of these situations. And that's exactly what this BetEngine customer did on this occasion.